That Africa is the biggest opportunity globally now. 5 years ago, when we first came to Africa, we were, shall we say, bold enough to say that we thought Africa would become the fastest growing region in the world. The IMF is forecasting now that that would happen. So I think people understand the growth, but I don't think they understand how broadly based and how powerful that growth is going to be. And I think Africa will change gear again. I think Africa can grow considerably faster than anywhere else in the world, and there's so many signs of that now, but I don't think that is very well understood today. Yeah, most of the uncultivated arable land in the world is in Africa. We're clearly going to have a huge increase in demand for basic agricultural commodities. There's very limited. Southern Russia, Ukraine, Africa are the only places in terms of land area that can satisfy that demand. What we've seen in other emerging markets, Brazil, but more recently Ukraine, where we're major players in agriculture, is very rapid transformation in terms of yields, productivity and output from the agricultural sector. With the stability you have in Africa and here in Nigeria, with the capital flows that you have, there's no reason that you can't enjoy the same success that countries like Brazil and Ukraine have enjoyed. And I think that will be one of the big surprise success stories over the next 5 years. You're starting to see it happen. It's happening from a very low base, but it doesn't mean to say it can't be quite transformational.
What are your thoughts on issues like corruption and bureaucracy in government? Many point to those issues as things that will drag Africa's growth going forward. Do you agree or disagree?
I don't agree. And I think the importance is to distinguish between the static and the dynamic. We all understand Africa's problems, and some people understand them only too well, and that's all they focus on. I think when we look at the dynamic, the economic dynamic is very clear now. But I think alongside that, you have a political and a governance dynamic, because the changed economic performance, it's changing aspirations and it's changing expectations. And you can see in the conference the quality of the government speakers, the level of analysis, the integrity that you can see coming from some of those people. It's very, very different to what we had 4 or 5 years ago, because you have an environment that is going to attract good people into government, but where through emerging middle class, more diverse business sector, the transparency around their behaviour and their accountability for their actions is only going to go in one direction. And again, to me it's fairly obvious, but I don't think that investors at large necessarily understand how powerful it is.
Rencap obviously is in the investment banking business. Talk to us about your expectations for deal flow going forward in Africa.
Yes. Yeah, we're an investment bank and we're an investor, so we own a lot of industrial assets and we're building a lot of non-investment banking businesses. But I think the deal flow will grow very rapidly with the kind of growth that you have in Africa, with the kind of growth you have here in Nigeria, for example. You'll have very rapid capital formulation. You'll have very rapid uptick in foreign capital flows. You'll have big build-up in foreign FDI. And having lived through these kind of transitions in some of the former Soviet economies, there's a tendency to underestimate how fast and how powerful those processes can be. So I don't know what will happen in the next 6 months, but over the next 3 to 5 years, the growth in the capital markets and in M&A will be phenomenal compared with what we see today, in my opinion.
Let's discuss modernization in Africa. To what extent do you think this will stunt the growth of the continent? Many obviously point to South Africa because of its strong institutions, level of development, as the entry point to Africa. What are your thoughts on the impact that modernization would have on the quality of growth we'll see in the continent?
I don't necessarily think that South Africa is the best entry point. South Africa has strengths, obvious strengths, but most of the growth is outside of South Africa. South Africa is growing slowly compared with the rest of the continent. You can have explosive growth in sub-Saharan Africa. To be successful here, you have to be local. So South Africa has its strengths and it has its weaknesses. In terms of modernisation, again, the issue is how quickly can these countries change? And I think, again, look at the election you've had in Nigeria compared with what we've had historically. No one's talking about it, but no one's talking about it because it went very smoothly. It's another stage in your development. Look at the kind of restructuring you've had of the banking sector here since the crisis. I think it's been of a very high quality. So that modernisation is happening, and it's part of a virtuous cycle of economic modernisation and political development.
Give us your thoughts on economic integration as the importance of that on the African continent. We know that, yes, there is growth potential across sub-Saharan Africa, but then there are so many countries as well, and many point to the fact that Brazil is probably the same size of the economy of Africa and as a whole. So give us your thoughts on the importance of economic integrations to really drive that growth forward.
I think it's vital, and I think it's an enormous opportunity. Obviously, we have a lot of small economies in Africa, and statistically, we also know that in terms of trade flows, Africa is the least integrated region in the world. So the efficiencies, the development of trade that can develop on the back of that dismantling of trade barriers is really massive. And as you're alluding to, that can give you the scale to be in the heavyweight division. And you can be in the heavyweight division in a relatively short period of time if those trade barriers come down.